Good morning and welcome to the 30th meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2013. Can I remind all those present that electronic devices should be switched off at all times. Our item today on the agenda is to take evidence on Creative Scotland. We have two panels. This morning's meeting follows on from an evidence session that we took last year on Creative Scotland, where we questioned the former Chief Executive and, of course, various other figures in the artistic and cultural community. Shortly after that meeting, as members will be well aware, 100 leading artists, some of whom are here today, wrote a critical open letter to Creative Scotland. I think it's not unfair to say this triggered a series of events which led to the resignation of the former Chief Executive and to a number of reforms in Creative Scotland. 1 year on, we wanted to effectively look at what's happened since that time and, of course, look to the future for Creative Scotland and Artists in Scotland. We have two panels. Later we will take evidence from the Chief Executive and Deputy Chief Executive of Creative Scotland. But first I'm delighted to welcome to the committee some of Scotland's leading figures from the arts world, Gillian Berry from Sigma Films, Judith Doherty from the Gridiron Theatre Company, David Gregg, playwright, and Liz Lockhead, poet and dramatist. Effectively, we have, and I should mention, we have asked, did something slightly unusual this time. We have put out a tweet last week asking for MDs to send in any questions or tweet questions to us. So no doubt some of those questions will come up as we go along, as well as questions from members. So hopefully that's, I think, been a rather open and transparent process to allow members of the artistic community and other members of the public to get involved in the committee's work. But can I begin with a general question? Obviously, the letter last year signed by 100 artists had quite an impact on Creative Scotland and the processes that were underway at that point. It raised a number of issues that it wanted addressed, particularly 8 separate issues. Is it fair to say that those issues have been addressed, and if they have not been addressed, which ones have been addressed and which ones have not been addressed? Who wants to begin? David.
I would start to say I think that the direction of travel is very positive. I think that the first thing to say was that the Pitlochry statement that the Board of Creative Scotland made was a very strong move in terms of addressing the points. It was a very strong statement of intent and was actually a very... It sort of showed that there had been, finally, we'd been heard, which actually perhaps had been the most overwhelming demand. I think that since then we've also had the Cabinet Secretary's speech, Fiona Hislop's speech about the arts, which from another direction has also shown that kind of policy intention is going in the right direction. I think between the sort of, from the in between those two poles is the organisation itself. And I think you can't expect an organisation to immediately, overnight, be able to change all, the different policies and cultures and problems that they may have had. But I would say that the direction of travel is great. And one example I would give of that would be the CS Open Sessions, which were run as part of the process of kind of trying to address the problem of communication between the artists and the organisation, have been brought back quite recently with the Chief Executive, with Janet and Ian Munro also going out and actually sort of coming face to face. So I think I would want to definitely acknowledge that this business of being prepared to listen has started. I think what I'm sure we'll be able to talk about as we go on is within that there is still some way to go on one or two of the issues, but the direction of travel is right, and there are some principles that have been established that are right.
Okay, thank you. Gillian?
I wasn't one of the signatories to that letter. Obviously, that was from a different sector. As far as film is concerned, it's really in a terrible state, in my opinion, and has been for quite some time. I think that just before Scottish Screen was abolished, it was getting its act together, and was becoming an organisation that we could be proud of. And with 35 employees, we felt like we were being nurtured and looked after, and we felt that our international connections were strengthening. However, going from Scottish Screen and 35 employees to, you know, a department of under 5 within Creative Scotland, while it's going through all this turmoil, has had a really damaging effect on filmmakers. I doubt that there are any filmmakers that make a decent living out of the sector. We sat back while the artists were raising their issues, because we felt that it should be a separate issue, and that we wanted to communicate directly about the film sector. And we formed Independent Producer Scotland back in August, so that we are now a united voice. The biggest problem is, you know, if we're going to be an independent country next year, where is the strategy for film? There isn't one. Are we going to be members of Euromage? Where is the funding going to come from? Are we going to start having a comparable level of funding with our nearest small neighbouring countries, like Northern Ireland, for example, is 12 million per annum, and the Republic of Ireland that has 14 million compared with our 3. And you know, these figures just get higher as you go into Europe. A lot of questions need to be answered. Delighted that Janet has joined Creative Scotland, and she is listening to us. We've had several meetings with her. She's going to try and source new funding streams. But what we need to see now is direct investment from the government into the film sector, because they're missing a trick. In Ireland, the sector is valued at 500 million, and the knock-on effect on tourism is 300 million. In Scotland, it's valued at 32 million in total. It's frankly not good enough.
Thank you. No doubt we'll come on to many of these points as we go through, but Judith.
Well, I was one of the signatories of the letter, and I would very much agree with David that there's been a massive change in the quality of communication between the artists and Creative Scotland. Generally feeling very positive about the changes that are happening, and in practical terms, from the thinking that has come out of the recent open sessions, the seeming commitment to regular funding, which as one of the outgoing flexibly funded organisations was a real point of worry and concern for us. Commitment to regular funding coming back in there is fabulous, as is the protection of a lead officer for artists, for individuals and organisations within Creative Scotland itself. That was a particular thing that we were all very concerned about. So there's real concrete evidence that we have been listened to, and we are being listened to. Obviously, there's a lot more detail that we need about funding strands and about restructure within Creative Scotland that we'll learn more about when a business plan comes out, and those funding application processes are made clearer to us in the coming months.
Liz.
Well, like David, you know, I feel it seems to be going the right way. I don't know yet. I feel that what I put down was probably historical stuff that was all about last year, and I don't really know enough about what it's going to be like yet. I mean, these things often don't affect me directly, and I don't get to know about them till quite a bit later. I'm not part of an organisation that's looking for funding. I just see what the ecology is, you know, that as an audience member and as somebody who works within theatre. I mean, I knew that theatre was just under incredible threat. I mean, everybody I knew, but that went across literature and all other things. There was a sense of real panic, and there's now a sense of, well, you know, they're listening to us now, things will change. But I haven't internalised what those are, so I'm not really competent to speak, you know, in that way. I'm sorry, not yet.
Thank you for that. I should have said earlier, and apologies for this, that Liz Smith, Neil Bibby and Jane, who's joined us now, Jane Baxter, were held up due to transport difficulties, I think. Apparently the traffic's unbelievable. So but Jane's with us now, so thank you very much. Liam MacArthur.
Yeah, Convener, thank you. I was just following up on Ms Berry's point about the film sector. I mean, obviously there's been a tremendous amount of publicity around the impact, for example, Brave has had, and therefore I think for those not necessarily closely involved in the sector, that the impression may be that the film sector in Scotland, certainly in terms of locational aspects, may be doing reasonably well. I mean, is it your view that there's a focus on the wrong aspects of developing the sector, that some bits are doing well, but other pretty critical parts are not doing so well? I mean, how would you envisage that strategy, leaving aside perhaps the funding for a second, because you've clearly made your views known on that? Is there something that's happening in relation to strategy in the film sector that needs a change of policy rather than just additional funding?
Yes, Liam. Sadly, there is no policy for film in Scotland, and there are, I go back to funding, but with such limited funds, the amount of projects and talent, artists that can be developed is extremely limited as well. In terms of Brave. That's a little bit of a red rag, because I think there was £6 million spent by Visit Scotland into promoting, Disney's cartoon version of our wee bit Hill and Glen, and if that money had been more wisely spent and put into the industry, it would have had a far greater impact on the Indigenous sector. So yes, we need to, or at least. Savvy policymakers in other countries know that it all begins with empowering the producers, and every project begins with the bud of an idea. And we have such a rich culture, we have so many stories to be told, and we're simply not telling them, or we're letting the rights be taken by companies based in LA or in London. We've got it on a plate. In terms of bringing productions into Scotland, I think that it's within Scottish Enterprises' remit, inward investment is, and they're missing a trick by not having an incentive fund and actually actively going out there seeking productions.
In terms of what's happened to Scottish Screen, I mean, obviously in the creation of Creative Scotland, there was an amalgamation of previously existing bodies. Has the impact through doing away with Scottish Screen in that process been more significant, and if so, why, than it has been in terms of the other art forms that kind of form part of that amalgamation as well?
Obviously, I can't speak very much about the other art forms and sectors, but the damage done by abolishing Scottish Screen has been significant. Yes, there are a few filmmakers left, and we can't stay here if something isn't done. We're the only country in Europe without a screen agency. We are. It's embarrassing being Scottish, going to international film festivals like Toronto or Cannes, because they simply look at us and are baffled as to why the economic and cultural benefits aren't recognised and rewarded by Scottish government. It's not good.
Can I just challenge you on one thing? You said if I think it was £6 million that had been spent by Visit Scotland had been spent more wisely in terms of promotion on the back of Brave. But that money was about promoting Scotland as a tourist destination. If they hadn't spent it on Brave, they wouldn't have spent it on filmmaking.
Well, I'd rather they had.
but they don't. They're an agency that's to promote visiting Scotland. hence the name.
You know, I think that that's fine if they want to pour money into promoting Scotland, but it just seems very harsh sitting as a filmmaker, you know, seeing that amount of money being put into the promotion of a film that wasn't made by Indigenous filmmakers. There's so much. You know, it's painful.
No, I accept the point you're making about in general, but the point I'm trying to make is that the budget of Visit Scotland was used to promote from people around the world to visit Scotland on the back of an opportunity that arose because of a Disney film. But if the Disney film didn't exist,
yes,
the money would not have been spent on you know, making films or anything to do with film production. The money would have been spent on other ways of bringing tourists to Scotland. So I'm not sure that I can't see how the £6 million spent on promoting visiting Scotland on the back of Brave somehow has some connection to the film industry per se.
There's a massive knock-on effect when you invest in Indigenous film industry on tourism. You know, as I said earlier on, 500 million in the Republic of Ireland, and the knock-on tourism is 300 million. So if, you know, whoever decided that the 6 million from Visit Scotland should go into Brave had, you know, strategically thought about how they could intervene and help the Indigenous film industry, then I'm sure the impact on tourism long-term would have been much greater.
Thank you. Colin Beattie, I know had some questions on the film aspect.
Yes,
since we've opened that up, I'll come to you, Colin, first.
Thanks, Convener. There's been some comment made that makes it clear that there's some cautious hopefulness about the future in terms of the way things are going. Is Creative Scotland actually responding effectively to the concerns about the future of the film industry? I mean, I see that they're in the process of hiring a director of film and media. Does that not mean they're putting a focus on it?
Absolutely. I believe that under Janet's leadership they are focusing. You know, a director of film, but are we going to have a fully populated film department? As you know, are we going to have someone looking after international promotion, marketing, co-productions, festivals, distribution? You know, we need a much healthier, bigger department, and I don't want to be the one to say that Creative Scotland should shift some money from another part of their organisation into film. I think that every department is struggling. However, I do think that we need Scottish Government intervention at this point, and I believe that the Scottish Government should directly invest in film for the first time, as they do with the other national performing companies. You know, why is over 20 million go into theatre, for example, a year, and only 3 into film? You know, I don't see the justification. I just don't know why that's happened. Janet has made lots of other positive moves. She's trying to find out if we're eligible for some European money, like Northern Ireland Screen received, as well as Yorkshire Screen last year. That would make an enormous difference. She's also suggested that we develop our own film agency in Scotland, which again would be a great idea. But it's still, you know, we still haven't answered the question. You know, there's no screen agency for Scotland, and you know, we really need one. Whether it's going to be a subgroup within Creative Scotland or a separate agency is, I guess, a question for you. Again,
in your written evidence here, you say that you expect to see positive changes to investment policy before the new financial year. What makes you think that, and what changes do you think are going to happen?
I'm hoping that we'll at least they'll recognise what changes need to be made in terms of the funding levels, in terms of the match funding, and opening up other funding streams.
The other thing is, you talk about forming Independent Producers Scotland. What's the significance of that, and what's the function of that body? What's the anticipated effect of that body?
So it's unifying the producers of Scotland that have never been united historically, and as a body, we get together regularly and discuss other possible funding streams or possibilities, sharing of ideas, sharing of strategies for international film. We only formed in August, but so far it's been very positive.
In terms of the skills base within Scotland, is there an adequate base to form a film industry here?
Absolutely. Internationally, we're recognised as being as having some incredibly talented individuals. In fact, we've hemorrhaged an awful lot of our talent, sadly, because the business here isn't thriving. However, you know, for example, we shot Under the Skin here year before last, and probably spent about 3/4 of a 10 million budget in Scotland. And the London filmmakers couldn't believe the level of talent that was operating in Scotland.
Just to come back to mention a Scottish Screen, why was it abolished?
I think it was abolished because the statisticians were looking for commercial return. I think that they were failing to recognise the wider economic benefits of film. They were looking for box office success, and of course, box office success is a phenomenon in Scotland because I mean, currently we've got 2, which is fantastic, but there has to be a training ground, and there was an awful lot of pressure to see these commercial results from Scottish Screen. These days, it's been proven over and over again that for every £1 invested in the film industry, there's a £6 return. And so I think the measuring was wrong.
Where do these figures come from, £6 return for every pound?
They come from, and in fact it can be more in some countries. In New York, it's 9-1, Northern Ireland 6-1. The effect of Game of Thrones to Northern Ireland was 8-1. It goes down, South Africa it's 5-1, and it goes down to 3-1 when it's co-productions. But they're available, and I have sources for all of them.
I would actually be interested, Convener, in seeing the sources for these figures.
Well, I'm sure if Gillian's got them, she'll be happy to supply them. Okay, thank you.
In fact, I supplied them to Scottish Enterprise yesterday.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. I wanted to ask, you've painted quite a bleak picture of where we are at the moment, and I take on board your genuine concerns about this. But is it not true that some progress has been made? Obviously, Creative Scotland have been doing the review of the film sector, the draft report of which has been tabled at the review group this month, and also in the Cabinet Secretary recently announced a £2 million loan fund to support long-term development of production infrastructure and commercial film and television in Scotland. So although the concerns are there, do you not feel that in part they're being addressed at the moment, and people are taking this very seriously at the moment?
Not seriously enough. I think very small steps have been taken. Great that the film sector review has been done and completed, but it doesn't show us anything that we didn't know already, and we've been shouting for a long time. And you know, the film sector, you know, we'll see the end of the film sector if something isn't done soon enough. And we need to get that studio built, and we need to get it built ASAP, because we're missing a massive trick. Which will affect every department of the film industry, and produce amazing cross-fertilisation opportunities. 2 million from Scottish Government in the form of a loan for the infrastructure isn't really enough.
And you mentioned, and this was another question that I'd asked the convener if I could come on was the European structural funding, and that the other areas of the UK have managed to access that for film. What barriers have you found in actually getting to that money, or is it something that we just haven't done in Scotland to approach the European structural funds?
I believe that Ken Hay prepared an application before Scottish Screen was abolished. I don't know why that application wasn't taken further. We can't apply for it as individuals. It has, but I've had conversations with Janet Archer about it, and she's investigating the possibilities of making an application from Scotland, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have a great case.
Okay, thank you very much. Joan McAlpine.
I actually had a question for Liz Lockhead, but quickly, since we're talking about film just now, I wanted to ask you a quick supplementary. The BBC puts quite a lot of money into film making. What do you think their record is in investing in film in Scotland?
BBC Films, who are based in London, have the ability to finance films up to a level of about 500,000, which comes, it's 50% licence fee and 50% equity. Whereas BBC Scotland has a much smaller fund, and it's not actually, it doesn't actually come from BBC Drama. BBC Drama in Scotland has no business with film at all. And it actually comes from the Commissioner, the small amount of funding that they have, and it's about £100,000 per film, and they can maybe do a handful.
Yeah, but the commissioners in London for the fund in London aren't really putting a great deal of money into Scottish film, are they, or Scottish subjects?
No.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. My question was for Liz Lockhead, and particularly item 7 of your written submission, where you say that Creative Scotland had no conception, it seemed, that there was such a thing as any kind of Indigenous Scottish culture, or that behoved them to learn about it. Obviously, as National Marker, making that statement is obviously cause for considerable concern. I wonder if you could elaborate on it in any way.
It's just my experience that but this is historical as well. It's it's not about anything that Janet Archer's doing, but it really did seem as if under Andrew Dixon that he wasn't listening ever to anything that was going on. They had the attitude that they were going to come up and they were going to set up all these initiatives, and we should all be incredibly grateful, and agendas would be set for us as artists. And all the artists in Scotland that I met in every field. And because I'm the marker, I get around everywhere from schools, wee schools, to, high and low. And, just everybody was just feeling that the people didn't get us. And how can you it's very difficult to give evidence about these things. But if everybody feels it and everybody's not crazy, the amount of despair and the amount of people that felt that, my paper isn't a paper with evidence and figures, because I'm just an individual. I have never applied for any funding myself ever. Sometimes I've been commissioned by people that are funded. Of course I have. But I have never filled up one of these forms. But I was very hopeful that I've read a lot of these forms under the Arts Council when I was on the drama committee, and the amount of paper that we got in was just unbelievable, and much of it not really relevant or in fantasy land, elaborate business plans. I did want to know whether the companies I was judging on were fiscally competent, did they bring in under budget, and I was judging them, their artistic, my opinion of their artistic stuff, and I was only one of, several practitioners on that. There was nobody in the new structure that was a practitioner. And I would just see Andrew Dixon. An example, the very first time I ever met him, it was at a thing called, it was a thing in Perth, it was about arts and the aged. And as I was going up, I thought to myself, what am I going to talk to these old people? Then I thought to myself, hey, I'm going up here with my bus pass. Maybe there'll be something like me. And here it turned out that every single person there in that hall in Perth all stood up and said, we don't feel there needs to be different arts for the aged or the older at all in any way, shape or form. What we would like is the same arts as anybody else. We would like access and help and, subsidies, or everybody kind of came out with the same thing. Everybody from the Provost of Perth said But, you know, there isn't a difficulty with getting older people into the arts. It's younger people that we've got difficulty getting into the arts. But Andrew Dixon had come along at the very beginning, and I was on second, and I listened to him in the wings, and he announced that he was there to... I can't remember how many festivals he said that existed in Scotland, arts festivals, and how wonderful these were. And he was there today to announce another one, which was going to be called Luminate, the Festival of Creative Ageing or something like this. And then he left. And if I was him, I would have listened to the newly created Macker to see if she was any good or not. And he didn't. He just left instantly, having made, and everybody all day said, we don't need Luminate. But this was no way of getting that information over. That's what it was like. I can only tell these things in boring anecdotal ways. Glasgow tried to get a play written by me, and I'm quite well known in theatre. It was cheap as chips. I did loads of work about it for free. It was about Edwin Morgan, and it was to be a year after his death. The Tron wanted to do it. It was for 3 actors. It's been a big success. It's going to be on next year under funding under the the Commonwealth Games funds and all that. There's an actual, so we did something in the end. But I remember writing to Andrew Dixon saying, if you don't tell us whether we're going to be able to do this, we won't be able to do it. I had to write it all in the month before we went into rehearsal. We had 2 weeks rehearsal. I didn't actually get paid fully for writing this thing, but because I'm an artist, I wanted to do it, so I did it. It's very different from film. I can write my poems and can leave them under the bed. I have never applied for a grant from, I should, but people like me should be able to, especially if they don't have other access to ways of earning their income, which I've done all my life via teaching, various different things. And, sometimes I've been paid very well for my job as an artist. Sometimes I've done it because of my passion for doing it. I come from the absolute other end of, and I was sitting here, I wish I could ask questions of the committee. I mean, I remember whenever Creative Scotland was made, a lot of people in the arts were saying, why are they yoking together these very different organisations together under one umbrella? Won't it be very difficult, because the kind of budgets that of necessity have to go into film have to be so huge. And yet, there seems to be certain kinds of mismatch. So, they didn't seem to have any conception at all. I mean, I should have maybe been more judicious in my language. But, they didn't seem to get us. And everybody felt that we were not got. Is that not true, David?
I think so. I think I would broadly actually reflect on what Gillian said and yoke the two together, that I think there's a general starting point, which is, do we want to have a culture in Scotland? I would hesitate to call it Scottish culture. I think it's all kinds of culture, but do we want it in Scotland? And if we do, we have to put the structures in place to fund and support it. In our art form, primarily drama and literature, there's a lot of experience of doing that, and the Scottish Arts Council in the past was quite good at it, and we continue. Despite the wobble, I think the direction of travel is right, but it's important to recognise that visual arts aren't represented here, so we can't speak on their behalf. There's also young and emerging artists who I think would have issues. But the film thing that I think I'm hearing Gillian say, and I completely agree with, is you can sort of let it happen if you want, in which case, inevitably, the great success and talent that we know exists, and I know from being a playwright, cross-fertilises with film. So Sunshine on Leith was originally a musical at Dundee Rep. Much of the acting talent in Filth are actors who I've worked with in the theatre. We can let that drift away, or we can decide that we would like to have a film culture in Scotland. But I guess I would like to just say that there's something about success, ironically, is what causes the sort of bolshiness that you experienced last year. That it's when there's a feeling of actually we've got something, please help us with it. That gives you the energy to be bolshy. And I would really, my strong feeling is please learn from last year with what's happening in terms of the film situation, that listening and responding is the way rather than trying to pretend it doesn't happen, because it won't go away, I think.
Thank you very much. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. You talked a little bit about quite significant events that have happened since the letter was produced by the artists, and I think one of the significant events, which already mentioned by David, was the Talbot Wright lecture by the Cabinet Secretary, which set out a vision for culture in Scotland, which was in stark contrast to Maria Miller down south, who was still talking about it being economic benefits. So in the context of that speech, if I could talk about the 8 commitments that were made by Creative Scotland last year, which vary from sort of cultural ideas but also changing the structure. Do you think that they are moving towards fulfilling those 8 commitments, and are there any of those 8 commitments in particular that you're still concerned about?
I would say that I think for me it's important to see this pressure from 2 ends, if you like. The board made the commitment in Pitlochry, but that, up to a point, it's easy for them to say that. The organisation then had to enact it, and the Culture Secretary, the Cabinet Secretary, made her speech. It was an extremely valuable and very morale-boosting speech. I think, but to an extent, it's easy for her to say that up to a point. The organisation in the middle has to deliver, and it's going to need support, and that support is going to need to be political. It does also need cooperation from the artistic sector, and that is what you get if you listen and if you respond. I think film has always been, as we've discussed, structurally problematic. I would, speaking purely personally, I think many of the commitments are going in the right direction. I think language does remain an issue. I think but it's very hard culturally to change that kind of language which is predicated on kind of not just economic values, because I think, as Liz has pointed out, nobody knows better than artists how to manage a budget, because we generally have very little to manage on, both as individual human beings, but also the tiny companies that we run. So I'm not talking about being afraid of economics, but I'm talking about the sense of value bigger than the immediate box office return. I think that language is embedded not just within an organisation like Creative Scotland, it's embedded across our culture. So for one organisation to try and move against that and kind of come back to a more, if you like, plain dealing with artists is always going to be hard. But that would be one example of a place where I still think we need to have more of a sense that the language does reflect a philosophy. And I think that the Cabinet Secretary's philosophy was very well articulated, and it would be fantastic to see that trickle down.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, David's a playwright. You're involved in Gridiron Theatre Company. From your perspective, how have the changes and the commitments been actually enacted?
So I run a theatre company that's been based in Edinburgh for 18 years. You can probably tell I'm not Scottish, although my accent's getting more Scottish the longer I'm in the country. I've actually been here longer than I was ever in Northern Ireland. It was an incredibly destabilising time for all of us. And as an artist, I see myself as an artist as well as a producer and a chief executive. One of the things that was just quite unbelievable was how completely devalued we became, how our confidence was completely knocked. But that was matched by, and was possibly even more damaging, was how we felt that the organisation back then, a year and a half ago, how they didn't seem to value the skill and expertise that they had in their own staff team. So one of the things that's very important going forward, and we're very glad to hear thoughts from the open sessions in particular coming out for this, is that there is going to be support and development for art form expertise within the organisation. And one of the things that we would ask, that with the restructuring, that direct communication between artist, practitioner and organisation to a person with relevant expertise within the organisation is maintained and supported, and that portfolios aren't stretched to such a level, and that funding streams don't sort of trickle out so that new little streams are coming in under what appears to be a very clear and straightforward presentation of 3 funding streams, so that those experts that are within the organisation come back to a point where they can actually give us good, clear and supportive advice. My present experience with the organisation is that in the past 3 or 4 months I have had really good dialogue. I have had understanding and support. But now we need to know what the new strategic aims and ambitions are. We are willing and determined to find our place within them. And all we want to do is deliver our art, entertain our audiences. Of course we want to sell our tickets, but mostly we want to have that creative experience and to do Scotland proud on the world stage, but also on our stages and our various buildings, our holes in the ground, our parks, our gardens, our playgrounds, our airports, here in our own country. We need the focus to be national and international, local and regional.
Okay, Liam MacArthur.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm struck by various comments that have been made about, I think, a very positive response to some of the work and the approach that Janet Archer has brought since her appointment, and referencing the Cabinet Secretary's speeches as well. But is there a view that the personnel within Creative Scotland have the skills, etc., to deliver what it is that both the board on the one hand and the Cabinet Secretary on the other have said now needs to be delivered? Because picking up on something Liz said about practitioners having a role within the process, and Judith talked about training support for those that are there. Is it a question of training and support, or are there perhaps in key positions a requirement for having more of a direct practitioner input within the organisation, rather than just the liaison with the different parts of the creative sector?
Well, I've always felt very clearly that there are definitely practitioners within the organisation, but I can only speak for theatre and my knowledge of dance practitioners that are within the organisation. Obviously, one of the things that was confusing and worrying for us is that any level of peer review, of practitioner peer review, was taken out of assessments and funding processes, which meant that there was a period of time, I believe, that we're still in it, that there was a whole body of expertise from within the Scottish Arts Council and Creative Scotland and from the sectors that wasn't available to be seen. And we're talking about people just going and experiencing work. So I definitely think that is an element of extra support and expertise that can be brought in. Within theatre and dance and literature, I believe, there are practitioners within the organisation still. More, always fantastic.
I believe that there are 2 people with film experience within Creative Scotland.
I would say that within the staff, I wouldn't like to comment too much on that, but I think Janet Archer herself is a former practitioner, at least knows the world of dance very well. So I think what is a key thing for me is the board. I think that the board remains essentially, in personnel terms, the same as it was previously. And that, of course, was the board that brought us the statement in Pitlochry, so that's a very good thing. But I would think that I would like to see a good deal more board development over the, coming soon, and part of that, I think, would be bringing on, putting more practitioners on the board. And I do think that there has to be some recognition that, you know, if there are people from the world of film on the board, then that's bound to be reflected in the way the organisation develops its policies, because that's where essentially where the direction comes from in the very first instance.
Obviously, we've heard quite a bit this morning in relation to what are seen as the inadequacies in terms of the cover or the film sector in terms of the current structure and funding, etc. Are there other aspects of creative activity for which Creative Scotland is responsible that are not necessarily adequately reflected at this stage? I mean, bearing in mind that the point that's been made about the direction of travel is markedly improved, but it will take perhaps a bit of time for that then to be reflected and turned around in the work of the organisation. Are there particular aspects where that creative activity is not adequately reflected, and in terms of the plan going forward, you would be expecting to see quite a marked change of approach?
Well, in the Arts Council, there used to be committees that were, practitioners. There was a drama committee in the Arts Council at one point. Then one day, a wonderful man called John Scotman-Creef chaired that, and he was fantastic, and he really did know a lot about theatre. And I remember him being really quite taken aback that one day he had to suddenly announce to us that our committee was being completely disbanded. And I think there was a lot of expertise on that committee. It was a laborious and an imperfect decision-making process in its own right, but there was input from a lot of practitioners. Then it became a single committee that dealt with everything, you know, and so there was less expertise. And then, as far as I know, within Creative Scotland, there's no unpaid, voluntary people, given advice, as far as I know. But I don't know a lot about I just experienced it, rather than knowing everything about how it had been put together. But I don't think there was much consultation of people. And it did seem, a lot of people told me that they had decisions made by people that had no expertise in their art form, because all categories were abandoned at one point, and you think, within the organisation.
And so has that been reflected in terms of particular creative activity, because it's not reflected necessarily in terms of the personnel and their personal experience? Then is that been reflected in terms of creative activity that really hasn't had the attention perhaps that it might have?
In the past, it was much more haphazard. If you were fortunate enough that your lead officer was, able to help you, you were helped. I think, just to draw back to your question, because I think we have to recognise who isn't here, because you can't have everybody, but there isn't visual artists here, and I think they would probably have a story. Similarly, dance. I think the one area that I have heard on the grapevine where there is issues, which I think we can't really speak to, but would be interesting to investigate, is what it's like for emergent artists, young and emergent artists across all art forms, whether that be visual, dance, and no doubt even film and television. I think there is always a tension between supporting, particularly when budgets are tight, between supporting the established culture, if you like, and then also supporting or developing and growing those who are trying to break through. And I certainly am hearing a lot that those young and emergent artists are really suffering in terms of trying to make any kind of a living. And I think what I would maybe draw attention to is Creative Scotland can only ever be one part of that ecology. In the past, there were other parts of that ecology. There were local authorities where you could get funding for your company, or matched funding, or small sums of money, or jobs that would be part-time within the education sector as an artist in residence, that would all help you to be a visual artist. And I think a lot of pressure is coming on those things, so that what that leaves is Creative Scotland exposed as the only place. So I suppose I would ask that, more broadly, obviously today's about Creative Scotland, but it's worth really thinking about what's going on with local authorities, where those, in a sense, minuscule amounts of money that were set aside for the arts are being cut, but that's having a very magnified effect, and it's affecting particularly, I think, I wouldn't say call them vulnerable, but the more fragile ecology of the artists and companies who are trying to emerge.
Yeah, sorry. I just would want to make mention of the recent Artist Bursaries scheme, which is a Creative Scotland scheme, which was, I think, the first awards were made in July. I mean, it's a very welcome scheme, and when you skim down the list of artists, the individual artists who've been given awards, it covers a full range of art forms. But one of the things that was so worrying about the removal of a regular funding scheme under the last set of sort of funding schemes, not use that word again, was the fact that as an individual artist or as an organisation, we very strongly feel our responsibility to give opportunities to emerging artists, to playwrights, to designers, to the full gamut of creative people, including stage management and technical people. So if we're destabilised, where have they got to go for support and help? So the fact that sense of being able to plan 2, 3 further years in advance, so that we can spot the emergent artists, the new writers, the new technical team coming up and guide them is very important as well.
I mean, recognising what you've said, David, about what others aren't doing, and therefore the additional sort of pressure and focus on what Creative Scotland is doing, is there anything that they could and should be doing in terms of new and emergent artists, whether it's the way that the funding schemes are operated or targeted?
Creative Scotland,
Creative Scotland, sorry, yeah.
I think that's... I wouldn't feel competent to talk about that at a policy level, although I'm sure that there would be things. I think there's a theme, though, which has emerged, and perhaps which applies to film as well, but I really felt it strongly in our 100 artists letter, that there's cultures can seem very strong and successful in a small country, but they are quite fragile, and they sort of can get eroded from below, and there will be a moment where they just go. They just, and that moment is very unpredictable, but it can often be solved by tiny things. So if local authorities in Scotland were required to fund the arts to small amounts, something like that could result in artists. It results in maybe, let's say, 3 or 4 new theatre productions a year, or 3 or 4 theatre productions a year being able to take place that wouldn't otherwise have taken place. That results in 20 acting jobs, which give 20 actors just that boost to stay in Scotland, which means you have a small strengthening of the pool of indigenous talent, so you don't have to bring it in from outside. I guess I'm saying from very small... I think it's a very responsive area to funding. Small amounts of funding bring big amounts of response. So, yeah, I mean, I hope that the emergent artists are being supported by Creative Scotland, and you'd have to speak to them about it. But I do know that any support you can, pressure you can politically put on all of the kind of cultural support institutions in Scotland will have a disproportionately positive response to the culture generally.
Just on, I mean, we've been told that the picture of local authority funding in terms of culture and the arts is varied, and some do it very well and have been consistent in that, others less so. Is there a view that in terms of new and emerging art, that's probably more the space in which Creative Scotland ought to be operating, and that local authorities would be expected perhaps to operate more in the space of traditional and established arts, or is it a mix?
I think that there are sort of more lateral, more practical ways that local authorities could support all artists and emerging artists over and above just cash, because we all know what the situation is. But there are empty buildings all over the country. There are support resources that could be made available. There are spaces that work could be being made that's made affordable for artists to be in them, which I think would also be beneficial for the people running those buildings. And that would be a very straightforward way for local authorities to give some just very practical and much needed support to artists across art forms.
Can I just say, with reference to film, that there are no nursery slopes at the moment for emerging talent, apart from Digicult, I believe. There used to be, 4 or 5 years ago, there were any one time there was at least 3, 4 or 5 short film schemes or medium length schemes or drama schemes. BBC Scotland have stopped completely supporting Tartan Shorts, and that's where Peter Mullen came through as a filmmaker, David Mackenzie, Lynn Ramsey, numerous others. There's a lot of film courses all over Scotland, but none of them are immersive, mentor-led, on-the-job training. And every day we have calls or emails or letters from graduates looking for work experience, because there just isn't the immersive experience available to them anymore. So, you know, it's very bleak for the emerging filmmaking talent as well.
Anecdotally, again, I think it's very important, and I think what was happening before, that emerging artists often were successful, sometimes in getting quite large amounts of funding, more than they'd actually asked for, if it fitted in one of the agendas that had been set up as being something that was happening. I think it's very important that these emerging artists get to be setting their own agendas, that what they want to do gets judged as to whether or not it's useful or not. And I would also like to clarify, going way back, that when I say Scottish Indigenous art, I don't mean, you know, Scottish Indigenous, I just mean art here in Scotland. That's all I'm talking about. You know, that I do think this is a country, and I do think it's a country with a very, very, very varied, you know, set of backgrounds and kind of sets of cultures within it. I mean, I'm talking about the Indigenous things that are here in this country in all their variety. I want to make that very clear.
Very clear, thanks Liz. George Adam and then Joan McAlpine.
Yes, thank you, Convener. It's actually Judith and David, when we were talking about previously, but Judith brings up the exciting part that we do have buildings and places where we could use, spaces we could use for other things. My constituency is Paisley, so we effectively have quite a lot of these older buildings where they're like that. And I think we've got an example, we've got the Pace Youth Theatre Company, which actually is in one of the former churches, but it's gone from success to success. Is it because maybe we've actually, between the local authority and the basket of funding that constantly receives, is that because we have that mechanism there with that theatre? Because one of the former actors was on a wee show on Saturday night on television, you know, so being a Doctor Who from Pace Theatre Company is not a bad idea. So, you know, is it just because we have that there? Is it not elsewhere? Is it because they've got to get this plethora of funding, or the basket of funding? Is that the issue?
Is one of the answers. Fife, I live in Fife, and Fife has a fantastic record with the arts. The Fife Theatres Trust has been really excellent, and they've even commissioned work, and that's been across, you know, the scale. So they've commissioned work by me, but also I think by newer or more emerging artists. But then, you know, I look at somewhere like Murray, where what was already a really tiny amount of money towards the arts was cut. And that seems to be utterly missing an opportunity. Why couldn't there be an equivalent of Pace in Murray? Why not? I mean, there must be young kids in Murray who want to be involved in the theatre. And as well as Pace, we talk about youth theatre. Youth theatre was where I began, and many, many people. But there are schemes for kids to get involved in filmmaking, kids to get involved in digital and video, which is so sort of available now. That kind of stuff, which can be done at local level, I really do think it has huge benefits further down the line.
It's very noticeable when you're working in wider Scotland. I mean, we were based in Edinburgh, but we've taken work everywhere. And one of our most successful shows that we've reproduced over 10 years, we actually opened in Paisley, because there are individuals there that went, I think this is a good thing. There were individuals working within the council that had support from within the council. They had resources. They had Paisley Arts Centre, although it was an outdoor show. It was Decky Does a Bronco, world premiere in Paisley. And the same with Fife. There are individuals within the Fife Theatre Trust, but also before that trust was established, who were just really proactive. Who put themselves out there, who had the ear of the people within the council making decisions, undoubtedly had the support of their MSPs. So the loss of support for the one individual who was left fighting his battle in Moray was just heartbreaking for all of us, because a lot of companies that are more established had cut our teeth in some of his venues. So it's about supporting the arts workers that you have, the youth arts workers. It makes a huge difference.
Can we not see that possible curriculum for excellence is something that we can, as artists yourselves, can feed into? Obviously, I can use examples that, again, locally, where we had Paisley was the last place that burnt people for being witches, and they did an amateur dramatic thing in the town centre, and it covered the curriculum for excellence because it told us about our history, told the kids about it, you know, they weren't really witches, went through the whole process, but there was also a dramatic kind of show as well in the street as well, and it was people who are artists who weren't actually working at that stage, so they did that as well. You know, is that not something that you're actually hitting one or two things there as well? You're also hitting the fact that you're getting footfall in the town centre and towns like Paisley and things like that as well. Is that not something that we can, you know, look to feeding into the curriculum for excellence with the Scottish Government? Oh, sorry, local authorities.
Absolutely, but we will unashamedly feed into everywhere that we can. But as makers of art, we're always thinking about ways of talking about politics, history, emotions, and the more communication that we have with our education establishments. I mean, Gridiron has great involvement with a lot of different educational establishments. The more we're preparing our artists of the future, but they have to have a knowledge of where their route is. There's whole levels of support that need to be created.
I think that you're absolutely right, and art feeds into all of those things. And I think if we start from the point of view that, particularly, I think in a small country, culture can have disproportionate benefits. It can bring benefits in terms of tourism, we've talked about already. It can bring benefits in terms of the self-esteem of kids involved in a youth theatre. It can bring benefits in terms of making people aware of their history, language, and so on. But I guess if we start, the easiest way to make all of that happen is to start by recognising the value of culture in the first instance, and just making sure that the relatively small amounts of money and political support and support within local authorities is brought to bear. And then all those things will almost, they'll tumble forth very naturally. You know, obviously it's your job, I guess, as politicians, to work out exactly how you manage the competing resources in order to achieve that. But I really would say that you know, the benefit ratio to the small amounts of support does I think warrant your attention.
I mean, the Arts in Fife thing, that example you give, is because Arts in Fife was a huge thing in the 70s. That's the first place I worked. I was always getting on the train and going. Because David Harding went in Glenrothes and built all these sculptures and, you know, actually created public art in Scotland, and created a course for it at Glasgow School of Art. One thing feeds another all the time, but the problem is, I'm happy. I'm just as happy working with Scottish Youth Theatre as I am with the Scottish Theatre Company. I don't care, because work is work and it's all the best stuff. But I'm bothered if the kids, the really talented kids I worked with last summer at Scottish Youth Theatre, or the fantastic students at the Conservatoire, I hate that word, but I've got to say it, the Conservatoire that I worked with on Misery Guts just a couple of weeks ago, they were fantastic, and it breaks my heart that there's nowhere for them to go next, if we don't get a decent ecology going. And I think why we all wrote that letter last year, I remember a conversation you had with me by phone at one point. You said, it's not, because we were saying we would get by anyway. We would do it, we would be poorer or richer, or we would be doing it. But you said to me, it's about how the thing won't exist at all if we don't fight for it now. The whole thing will die, and the next people won't be able to get on that rung. And that matters a lot to me. I don't have any kids of my own, so the future and the kids matter to me a lot. And those kids at the Conservatoire, all the other, friends that went to see it said, they're proper grown-up actors. It breaks your heart there might not be jobs for them. It's very hard. But Creative Scotland has to be a flexible enough organisation to help things like that happen, and to be responding to things that are happening rather than setting the agenda from on high. And I think that's the most important thing.
Joan McAlpine, just to finish us off. Joan.
All right. I was actually going to double back several questions, but before that I thought it might be quite helpful if I just said I'm co-convener of the Cross-Party Group in Culture, which was recently formed, and the issues that you've raised about local authority funding is something that's been discussed in that group, and at one of our meetings in the course of the year we will explore it further, because clearly you've actually just reinforced what we were thinking, in the sense that it is a real problem for artists. But the question I wanted to double back on was to, you've talked about the influence of expertise and individuals being in the right place at the right time. Liz mentioned David Harding in the 1970s in Glenrothes. Given that it's already been said that literature has been one of our strengths and it feeds into other art forms as well, within Creative Scotland, the loss of Gavin Wallace, is that something that is of concern to the writers? And how do we go forward? Does that threaten the development of literature at that level in Scotland? Obviously, artists continue to write, but in terms of promoting literature, having the expertise, is it going to be a problem?
Well, the writers of my generation are still in a state of grief, really. They're grieving that they were aware of the fact that Gavin really wasn't happy and really didn't feel that the organisation that he was working for really was supporting the things that he'd fought for all those years. So, it's just got to be different from that. I'm sorry, I don't have all these policies and ideas. I'm sort of in the position of being a moan about how things were, but it's how, if we don't go, this wasn't good, we need to do it differently. Where do we go? The loss of Gavin Wallace is drastic. I don't think, well, he's not replaceable as a human being, because his expertise in literature and his passionate, wide knowledge of it was absolutely invaluable to us all. Not financially. It's much bigger than that. But that thing you were saying about the one thing feeding another, that's one of the real advantages we've got here in Scotland. The different art forms aren't all in different, in different bags. We all work together whenever we get the chance, and that's one of the joys of living here.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know we haven't covered everything that possibly we would want to cover, but given the time constraints we work under, can I thank you very much for coming along this morning and giving us your views on what's happened in the past year and hopefully what's going to happen in the future. So can I thank you very much for taking the time to come this morning. It is very much appreciated. And can I suspend the meeting very briefly while we change panels? Thank you. Can I now welcome to the meeting Janet Archer, who's the Chief Executive of Creative Scotland. Welcome, Janet. Thank you very much for coming along this morning to this evidence session. If I can just kick us off with a general question. Clearly it's been a difficult time over the last 18 months or so. And I just wondered whether or not you believed that effectively we were over the hump of that difficulty. We heard some positive comments from the artists earlier, but obviously there are still a lot of work still to be done. Given the commitments that you've made and changes that would be coming forward from Creative Scotland, how far along that road do you think you currently are?
I think we're doing well. I think, as we heard from David earlier, the board made a very strong commitment a year ago to change, and we've achieved a great deal in terms of tackling those commitments and reported to you in the paper that we submitted to this meeting, convener. What I've been doing for 5 months or so that I've been in post is really trying to understand what the problem is. And I think we're there with that now. And now we need to apply ourselves to fixing that. I'm not going to promise to do that overnight. I think if I'm not interested in a sticking plaster approach, I think we need to really fix things properly so that we create a platform for long-term sustainability for the arts, screen and creative industries in this country. And that's what we're setting out to do.
Do you think, though, you've already achieved that, or will achieve in the near future, a more open and accessible route into the Creative Scotland for artists working in Scotland? In other words, I think one of the complaints from last year was that it felt like the organisation operated almost separately from the artistic community.
Indeed, and some of you may be aware, I was the chair of an organisation based in Glasgow, the Workroom, and it's a artists' membership organisation which supports emergent artists as well as established artists working in dance. And I heard loud and clear what the concerns were from that constituency, and I'm very committed to ensuring that we engage with artists across Scotland in shaping the way forward. We've just completed 3 days of open sessions in Glasgow, Langham, and yesterday in Inverness. And if you look at the tweets which came through from yesterday's meeting, it signalled that we are having an open conversation. We are listening to what people are saying to us. We're amending and adapting our plan as comment and feedback comes in, and we'll continue to do that until the end of January, when we submit the plan to the Scottish Government in its final draft form.
Okay, thank you very much. I know members have a number of questions. Can I start with George Adam?
Yes, thank you. The previous panel had some concerns regarding structure and access for like younger people, emerging talent coming through. When I mentioned something in my own local area, the Pace Theatre Company, it's unusual for me to mention Paisley in committee. It's normally just in the chamber. But at this stage, obviously it's pretty patchy throughout the country. Now, the ministers have recently announced their Time to Shine, the Scottish Government's youth arts strategy. Now, how do you believe this will be integrated into the curriculum for excellence, like I mentioned earlier on, you know, because this gives us an option for young people to actually see arts totally joined up with their learning environment as well?
Yes, I mean, first I should say how great it is to be working in a country that has a curriculum for excellence that talks about creativity in the way that it does. And as you know, I've come from England. It's not quite the same there at the moment. I spoke at the ADES conference to Directors of Education last week, and one of the questions I put out to the conference was, how can we effect a closer working relationship with you and bring together our constituency, artists and creative organisations, to work more closely with local authorities in delivering the curriculum for excellence. And I think we got a good response. So we're opening up that dialogue. Time to Shine is a fantastic strategy for children and young people. We're delighted that we've now got £5 million to distribute through that, and we're in the process of identifying the route to which we're going to do that. We're going to be announcing a series of hubs, so we want people to work together in different parts of Scotland and to bid to become, we haven't decided what they're going to be called yet. It's a group of young people who are going to be coming up with a name for it, but creative clusters for young people to work together, learn, develop their skills, and open up pathways to whatever, either career route, if that's what they choose to do, or creative life, if that's their preferred option, and building a countrywide approach to be able to offer up youth provision in the future.
Thank you. Joan McAlpine.
In terms of your open sessions, you talked about being in Langham, which is in the south of Scotland, which is part of the country that I represent. One of the, I think, probably the few chinks of light for Creative Scotland before you arrived was a feeling in the southwest of Scotland that they were being paid attention to more, and there was quite a bit of focus on particularly Dumfries and Galloway, where Langham is. They were concerned that the pendulum would swing back towards the Central Belt. Can you give reassurances to artists in the southwest of Scotland that that won't happen?
It won't happen.
Right.
I absolutely believe that everybody, no matter who they are and where they come from, has the right to have access to arts and culture, and we're paying very strong attention to how we're going to be able to achieve that better in the future. One of the things that came through from Langham, actually, which we were asked to feed back to the Scottish Government, is there was a concern about access to digital platforms and digital infrastructure, a call for better IT. And we said that that would be something that we would feed back to you. I think there was a feeling that their mobile phone signals didn't always work.
No, that's a real problem in the southwest of Scotland, which hopefully we'll be able to address going forward when we've got control of these things ourselves. Just talking about Langham, you were there yourself. One of our greatest poets, is from Langham, Hugh MacDiarmid, Christopher Grieve. If you went to Langham, you would, unless you went up to the memorial, you would hardly know that. As someone coming into the country from the outside, do you think it's extraordinary that one of our most influential literary figures, you go to his hometown and there isn't, we may perhaps don't celebrate these people enough, or from an arts point of view, develop their legacy, whatever. And what do you think your organisation can do about that?
I completely agree with you, and our advocacy role is absolutely fundamental. So we need to be able to stand up and advocate for all the things that we fund, but much more than that, we need to advocate for all of the things that we don't fund, and indeed all of the things that have happened well before our organisation was set up. So I think that's really important. When I was first appointed into this role, I went back to my old boss at the Arts Council in England and I said, there's a lot of extraordinary things happening in Scotland. And his response was, but we wouldn't know about that in London. And that really resonated with me because it gave me a strong sense that what we need to do is to make sure that we take responsibility to hold an overview. That means having strong, shared, connected relationships with everybody who's involved in the arts, green and creative industries across Scotland, and those relationships need to be live, and we need to make sure that at any time we've got access to, I'll use jargon, a big data set, if you like, of information that draws in all of the subtleties and nuances of cultural life in Scotland, and make sure that we sing about that. So, yesterday I was in Venice and I met a storyteller called George W. Macpherson, who told me that he was one of the last 3 storytellers in Scotland who has got in his memory original stories from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years back. And clearly Creative Scotland needs to work with people like that and be able to ensure that that lives on, and to support him to teach his stories and train other young people up. He was in his 80s to ensure that that heritage continues. At the same time, we need to be right across young emerging artists who are perhaps doing things that none of us have ever experienced before in all kinds of different ways, and make sure that we're able to horizon scan and understand what future generations are going to want to connect with in terms of the arts, green and creative industries, and prepare for for things that none of us have even imagined might happen in 20 years' time.
I think what came across very strongly from the evidence about film this morning was that, whereas other areas of the arts are, have been quite vibrant in the past, they feed into film, and like our witness mentioned that, there are stories as a country that aren't actually being told through film, and that's not just your fault, it's also the fault of, maybe other agencies that are supposed to be doing that, like the BBC. But in terms of what we're talking about, it's like, you know, like if you look at what the BBC funds, for example, in terms of film, if you look over the last few years, you'll see an awful lot of Dickens remakes and stuff like that, and lots of, well, that's fantastic, love Dickens, but our stories are not told in film, and they're not told in the popular medium that most people get to see. Do you agree that that's a serious problem in terms of, you know, this small culture going forward?
I think stories have to be told through all kinds of means, but clearly digital platforms are a fantastic way of getting things out into the wider public domain and in a very tangible way. And I think we have to support both stories that are told through live performance and through storytelling and through painting and drawing and all kinds of other art forms, including dance, as well as digital media. And what's interesting for me about the construct of Creative Scotland is the opportunity that sits within it. In effect, we've got a remit that covers 3 spheres across the arts, screen and creative industries. And of course, each of those spheres have discrete development needs in their own right. But the convergence in the middle, if you overlap those areas, is potentially quite fascinating. And there are lots and lots of examples, as you say, of practitioners who traverse across the 3. And that's what we're looking at quite hard in terms of whether or not that creates opportunity, both in terms of creative development and artistic development and pushing boundaries in terms of how things are expressed, but also in terms of opportunities in terms of exploiting that IP and generating new income streams for artists to be able to do the work that they do.
You mentioned in passing there the open sessions you've had over this last few days in various parts of the country. What in your view, what has emerged from those open sessions that you didn't already know?
I think they all offered us up different things. In Glasgow, we heard loud and clear that what people want now is the detail. So we've been talking to people about the overview in terms of our 5 overarching ambitions that we're setting out in the context of the new plan. People really want to know now, how are they going to be able to access funds in the future? How are we going to deliver on our promise to make it easier and clearer and more straightforward to apply for funding from us? And how are we going to be open and transparent in relation to how we make decisions and generate a sense of trust that we're making the right decisions and that they're informed decisions with the right kind of expertise going into decisions at the right time? And there's a real hunger, and I have to remind myself that this isn't just about starting from the day I began at Creative Scotland. People have been waiting for a very long time now for a system that works, and that's why we're on such a fast timeline to generate that.
Liam, I think, had some questions in this area.
Yeah, more in relation to budgetary issues, obviously. Leaving aside the film issue, I think colleagues will come to that shortly. One of the other things that we heard in the earlier panel session was some of the pressures in relation to getting funding to new and emerging artistic talent. I'm just wondering whether there is more that you can say at this stage about either what you've heard through the open sessions or through the other dialogue that have taken place, about how perhaps that can be addressed. Not necessarily the satisfaction of all. I think people obviously recognise that there are budgetary constraints here, but it did seem to be something that came through quite strongly in terms of an area that required addressing.
Obviously, Time to Shine is focused on young people and will, to an extent, provide support for new talent to develop from a very early age. We've just funded 50 artists' bursaries, and this year put aside £1.5 million to support a new artist bursary scheme, which is all about research and development of practice. And that's been quite an interesting process because, in fact, what it told us is that there are way more artists out there than perhaps we ever imagined would want to take up such an opportunity. So in the event, in the first round of that scheme, we were only able to fund 20% of the artists who applied, which isn't really good enough. So we need to think quite hard about how we fund individual artists and individual creative people going forwards. One of the commitments that the board made a year ago was to reduce the amount of money that Creative Scotland spends on projects that it delivers itself through what we call managed funds, and put more money out into the sectors that we serve. And we're looking quite hard at how we can move money from one sphere of our work into being able to support emerging talent and established artists, actually, to be able to continue to evolve their practice. Being an artist isn't research and development isn't something that you just do at the early part of your career. It's something you do for your whole lifetime. And every great artist that I know has a continuum of reflection and deepening of practice and pushing to achieve things that perhaps they might have imagined were impossible. That's what being an artist is all about. And therefore you need time and space to reflect and trial and test and debate with yourself and with others if you're really going to produce excellence.
We also heard this morning about the critical role that local authorities have traditionally played in this area, and that perhaps there's a bit of a patchwork in terms of what councils are doing. You spoke earlier about the engagement you've had with ADES in relation to Curriculum for Excellence, but what sort of discussions have you had with local authorities, either those who are exemplars or those who are perhaps at the other end of the spectrum here, about trying to ensure that what Creative Scotland is doing and what local authorities are doing in supporting culture and the arts is working in tandem as far as it can?
We have a very good relationship with Vocal, which is the organisation which connects up culture across local authorities in Scotland. And I've had some very good conversations with Heather Stewart, who's been the convener for Fife and chair of Vocal for the last period. And I attended the Vocal conference. The figures that we got through last week show that local authority investment in culture is reasonably stable, and predictions going forward, I cautiously say, appear to be reasonably stable. That's good, and clearly there are some places like Murray where things are not stable, and there are other examples where things are beginning to look fragile. But one of the things that struck me in talking to Heather and others at the Vocal conference is that the language is different. When you heard from the artists who spoke today and producers, there was a call for a particular kind of language in representing the arts and film. And it just struck me that over the course of the day at the Vocal conference that the discussion was around culture. And perhaps that's the way that local authorities need to think in terms of the breadth and scope of what culture contains within it in terms of museums and heritage and sport and arts and education and all kinds of other things. So that made me think that perhaps we need to open up another layer of conversation with local authorities about the complexity in terms of all of the things that we support, and perhaps find a way of generating a deeper sense of recognition of the public value of the arts at the heart of that conversation.
So you say that, and George has mentioned what happens in Paisley. I mean, I would recognise in someone like Orkney, clearly they've a good track record in this respect, not least, I think, recognising that that cultural offering is part of population retention, if nothing else, but goes far wider. You say that the spending, though, has been fairly stable, but what we were hearing from the first panel was that there had been a bit of a retrenchment, and therefore is it the case that the fundings remain stable, but it's going into different areas or it's being delivered in different ways, that has created additional pressure on Creative Scotland to then step in to kind of plug gaps. I can't quite draw the correlation between what was said in that first panel in terms of their concerns about what councillors are doing and what you're saying about the stability of the funding. Is there an explanation you might be able to offer for that?
I'm sure there is an explanation, and I'm not 100% sure that I've got the detail in my head around what it is yet. So I can only offer you some thoughts, which are based on some of the conversations I've had with local authorities to date. It could simply be that for artists whose focus is on making great work and perhaps wanting to do that before connecting up with communities and achieving some of the things that local authorities might want them to achieve, it might be difficult to open the door and develop the work that they want to do through the local authority route. But I wouldn't pretend to begin to give you a hard and fast answer to that question until we've been able to carry out some proper interrogation of what the plans are for local authorities going forward and what their policy priorities are in terms of delivering that work.
One final question, and I don't want to steal the thunder of colleagues who will go on to discuss the film sector, but again, one of the points for the first panel was that there are other agencies, obviously, that are have budgets available and have an impact on parts of the creative sector. Both Scottish Enterprise and Visit Scotland were cited. Have you had discussions with those bodies about the way in which they are spending and whether or not this can be perhaps better or deployed in better ways or more targeted ways to deliver across your kind of communal agendas? Because clearly there is a concern there that bigger budgets are available but aren't necessarily fully exploiting the potential in terms of the creative sectors that they might.
We've had some very positive conversations with both Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise and Scottish Funding Council and Skills Development Scotland, where I chair the SCIP meeting, which is the Scottish Creative Industries Partnership meeting. I've chaired one meeting so far. I found it very constructive, real sense of commitment from the organisations represented around the table to want to work together. We've agreed to conduct a mapping exercise of the creative industries, which will include the arts across Scotland, so that we understand what the context is that we're all collectively dealing with. And we're also reviewing how public investment in skills development into the arts, green and creative industries is currently working, and we're looking at that as a team. And out of that, I'm sure will come some thoughts in terms of how we might better collectively support the arts, green and creative industries in the future.
George Adam.
Yes, I just wanted to go on and develop Liam's point about the local government level. You know, we often talk about planning and it's economic development 9 times out of 10 that we're always talking about. I was a councillor previously, but I've got a colleague or a friend who's involved in the arts, and she talks about cultural planning. You know, and initially I was quite sceptical about the idea, but when I seen some of our projects working, you know, I actually started to believe that this is maybe one way we should start looking at things differently. Do you think some of the kind of patchwork problems we have at local authority level, do you think possibly if we started looking at cultural planning as opposed to, and amongst planning and economic development as well, because as we've heard earlier on today, for every £1 you spend, you probably get something back as well, so it does interconnect. And as someone who's just been converted to this way of thinking, I can see that that is possible in the future. What do you think about these ideas, that kind of idea?
I think it would be fantastic if there could be joint effort around cultural planning. I find the approach to prevention policy really interesting in Scotland. And for me, arts and culture have a huge role to play in terms of shaping human beings, creating cultural identity, creating confidence, generating creative people who are able to contribute to society, not just in terms of creating artistic work, but actually creating people who are able to go on and do extraordinary things no matter what their choice of careers might be. And if there could be a connected approach to cultural planning, you'd be able to understand and evidence how that's been achieved in the past, and you'd be able to focus policy on being able to fast-track development in that area in the future. And we'd be very interested in working with local authorities to be able to drive that.
Thank you very much. There's a number of subjects that have come up both in written submissions to the committee and again this morning in the first panel. Maybe I could just address a couple of them. There was the question raised, I think it was by Liz Lockhead, about under the previous Arts Council situation, there were various subcommittees effectively on drama and I presume on other subjects as well, but they vanished. What is the current situation with Creative Scotland, and how do you get direct input, if it's not through subcommittee role, how do you get direct input from artists, whether it be through that route or through board membership or some other route?
Well, first of all, we have daily conversations with artists through our staff team, and whilst we perhaps haven't been as clear over the past couple of years in terms of how that might happen, we certainly are very active now in having regular dialogue and feeding through views of artists. We've been meeting artists at our open sessions, and we're putting our plan up online in January for people to respond to, and we know and hope that artists will be part of that. In terms of artists feeding into decision making, we worked with a panel of artists and producers to feed into the artist bursary scheme and to collectively consider applications that were coming through. We need to think quite carefully about how we approach using peers in the future. One of the problems with panels for organisations like ours is that they can be quite time-consuming in terms of administering them, and they can be quite costly. And we need to balance that with our imperative to get as much money as we can out into artists and arts organisations. But we certainly need to get better at using a suite of evidence. We need to get our staff out, as we were challenged to earlier, seeing work, writing reports on work in the way that the old Scottish Arts Council used to. We need to generate potentially peer reviews from a wide source of voices outside of the organisation and use those to build up a bank of expertise to feed into funding and decisions as they go forwards.
How aware do you think artists in Scotland actually are of the routes that that you want them to use to contribute to your work?
I think, if I'm honest, our funding schemes at the moment are quite confusing. And if you visit our website, it's quite a complex route to navigate. It's better than it was 6 months ago, but it's by no means perfect yet. So that's why we're on a track to simplifying our funding programmes and making it really clear in relation to how artists can come in and apply for funding. One of the things that came through Inverness yesterday as a suggestion from the people who attended our open session was a suggestion that we might want to think about a pre-application form, which would be a one-side A4, which would indicate what people's projects were, how much money they're asking for, and a general sense of what they want to do with it as a first stage before people have to fill in the whole application form. I thought that was a pretty smart idea, and that's something we're going to consider in terms of moving things forward.
When do you think, can you give us a timescale for the completion of that work so that we end up with a simplified procedure?
We've committed to April the 1st next year as the date when we announce what we're going to be doing. We're going to phase how we work. So we're going to consolidate all of our regularly funded organisations, so organisations who come through the various schemes that we currently run. That covers foundation organisations, project forming programmes, annual clients into one pool, and we're going to invite for open applications to come in next summer, and we'll assess those by next autumn. So at the moment, I think there are around 150 or so organisations who currently get funded through those kinds of routes, which incidentally is more than there were 2 or 3 years ago. And at the same time, we'll be reviewing how we deliver our project funding. We'll have a phased transition from the current programmes of funding that we offer for projects to the new programmes.
Thank you. One of the questions that was raised this morning and was raised in the original comments by artists a year ago in the letter signed by the 100 artists was the kind of language that the organisation was using. And it was raised again this morning as saying a lot of things have changed, things have improved, we're in the right direction, perhaps except in relation to the language that's used. And I noticed that you haven't used many cliches in that or much jargon, but you know, we did have horizon scanning, and we did have some of these, and customer focus, I think, was one of the ones I saw earlier in your paper. You know, is there still a problem with the kind of language that's been used by the organisation?
No, I think we're reining ourselves in and checking ourselves as we communicate. One of the things, interestingly, that came through from the reference group is the need for us to be multilinguists, was the phrase that came through from one artist. We need to be able to speak different languages depending on who we're talking to. For an organisation that spans across the subsidised and the commercial creative sectors, we've got to be quite smart about that and make sure that we hold the expertise in different bits of the organisation so that we can communicate in a way that resonates, because we want to create opportunities for people who want to generate businesses and jobs out of the work that they do, as much as value the core intrinsic purpose of so many artists' work. So we do need to be deft and be able to articulate ourselves in many different ways.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Colin Beattie, I know had some questions.
Thank you, Vera. The previous panel raised quite a few criticisms about the film industry, and in my mind it perhaps dominated to some extent. How are you responding to these criticisms?
I'm working quite closely with Gillian Berry, as she said, and IPS. We've put some initial funding into the Independent Producers Scotland to be able to set themselves up as an organisation and administer themselves. We're looking at, I suppose, a number of different avenues in terms of film investment. Clearly, we need to listen hard to what Gillian is saying in relation to the amount of investment that goes into film. We're not in a position to move a lot of the money that we currently put into the arts into film within the frame of Creative Scotland's budgets. But what we can do is work with film to increase investment into the film arena. We're looking at European funding. There are opportunities to partner with other organisations to generate new investment into film through that route. And you noted earlier that we're appointing a new director of film and media who we hope will have a commercial background, who'll have the networks and contacts globally to be able to generate new commercial investment into the film sector in Scotland and work with film companies to be able to develop their skills to be able to do that for themselves in time.
Comment was made about the abolition of Scottish Screen and the impact that had. Clearly that was before your time. Do you see the emergence of something similar again? Is that something that's on the table?
Our remit is to serve the arts, screen and creative industries, and we're working very hard to develop a way to do that in a sensible and productive way as we can. We currently, interestingly, we currently spend as much money on production as the final year of Scottish Screen. And of course the savings that are being made are in relation to things like finance and marketing and HR and all the core administrative functions of an organisation like ours. And as I understand it, the shift from two organisations to one was in the context of public reform in Scotland in order to generate those savings. And I think we've done that reasonably well.
But it's been, you know, looking at the paper that was submitted by Gillian Berry, quite clearly, according to this, there's a serious loss to the film industry by not having something like Scottish Screen in existence. You haven't really covered whether you think that there should be a similar organisation.
I want to scrutinise the film sector review and use that to inform where we move forwards to in relation to a screen strategy for Scotland. We've committed in our guidance letter this year to doing that work with the film sector, and when we've gone through that process, I think we'll be in a better position to say whether or not film needs its own engine, if you like, in terms of a development agency, or whether it sits comfortably within the overall remit of Creative Scotland.
Do you think the skills base for the film industry in Scotland at the moment is adequate? How can it be expanded and strengthened?
I think the message that I'm hearing from the film sector is that there's a call for new investment into film, and that the film sector has got the production skills to be able to deliver good films and the creative skills to be able to deliver good films. At the moment, we're not generating a mixed economy into the film sector in Scotland. So part of the skills development has to be about capacity building and growing skills in people to be able to do that, driving for new investment alongside Creative Scotland.
Just to clarify in my own mind, how much is Creative Scotland at the moment actually investing every year in the film industry?
It's around £5 million. I can give you an accurate figure if I dug into my papers here, but if it's all right with you, I'd rather use that as a benchmark.
Well, perhaps you could send us the accurate figure afterwards, if that's acceptable. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. If I could just ask a little bit more about the investigations you're doing into European structural funding in the film sector, and perhaps if you can shed some light on why Scotland hasn't been able to secure that funding when it has been secured in Northern Ireland, and Yorkshire, I believe, was the other area.
Yes, I mean, I think my impression is the reason why Scotland hasn't secured funding is that nobody has applied for it. So what we're doing now is looking at how we might partner up with others to apply for it. The strategy from the Scottish Government in relation to generating European funding into Scotland is about is about big packages being put forward by key agencies. So we need to have discussion with Scottish Enterprise to see whether or not there's space within their package to support film, and look at that as a potential route. There might be local authority packages who might be willing to include film as part of their overall request for funding, and we're also beginning to explore that too.
And ask a different question, if that's
Well, I'll come back to you if it's not on film, I think. Liam, was it on film?
Yes. Just following up some of the points further that were raised at the first panel, talk about the new director appointment that is imminent in relation to film. One of the points that was being made in terms of the profiling of the sector at international festivals, Toronto was cited, that there has been an inability to punch at our weight to date. Is your view that that will be addressed by the director appointment, or is there further capacity that needs to be built into Creative Scotland in this division of the agency?
But I mean, we did have staff in Toronto this year, and we did have a reception in Toronto which profiled Scottish film there. So we are currently undertaking that work. And will continue to do so with our present resources. the new director will bring in a new level of expertise and an extra person into the organisation to unlock potential that isn't currently being tapped.
Benchmark with the sector, and clearly they're raising this concern and will have been aware of the presence in Toronto. Have you benchmarked the impact that presence has compared to perhaps our competitor countries, either learning the lessons from what they're doing, or establishing whether there are other things that we can do better even with the resources that are being deployed?
The honest answer is no, but that's certainly something that we will be doing going forwards.
And just further, I think the point it was David Gregg that made in relation to the current board of Creative Scotland, that actually, perhaps over time, not necessarily as an immediate action, but perhaps one of the ways of addressing some of the concerns of the film sector is a greater level of representation from those of a film background at a board level, which then perhaps gives greater confidence that throughout the organisation that will then be reflected and decisions are taken. Is that something that you've discussed either with Gillian or colleagues as something that you would be looking to try to achieve over the next few years?
Indeed, and we do have members of the board who have deep knowledge of film. It's always going to be important to ensure that the range of interests that we represent are represented properly on our board, so that factors through into policy making. But I am absolutely delighted that the board have supported my decision to appoint a director of film and media, which is the first time that Creative Scotland will have had a specialist at that level.
On the issue of structural funds that Claire raised earlier, have you had discussions with the Culture Secretary about making representations to the relevant Cabinet Secretary with responsibility for Scottish Enterprise about making the most compelling case, if you will, for inclusion of film within the wider package that Scottish Enterprise will be putting forward?
We have, and there's a meeting I think scheduled for January with all of the relevant parties and IPS to discuss that.
Thank you.
Liz Smith.
Convener, can I first of all apologise for a very late arrival, which was due to the traffic chaos on the west side of town, which delayed me by a couple of hours. Could I just ask, in your answer to a question that Joan McAlpine asked you, you were very clear about the need to be much more coherent, speaking to a wider range of people right across the artistic spectrum. What criteria will you judge how successful you have been in doing that? How will you decide whether this has worked or whether it hasn't worked?
Well, I mean, I guess the proof will be in the pudding in terms of what we manage to generate in terms of outcomes. So, I mean, first of all, we need to define who the main key strategic partners are that we need to have relationships with in order to be able to drive opportunity. We're doing that at the moment. In our new plan, we're going to be including a series of statements from those partners articulating how they see themselves working with Creative Scotland going forwards. And out of that will become a series of actions which we'll develop with those partners. And in a year's time, we'll review those and test whether or not we've been able to achieve them.
And how easy do you think it will be to have a look at the strategic direction, which is obviously one of the big criticisms that was thrown up before you took office, against some of the financial obligations? I mean, people say that some of the artistic community have been more concerned about balancing the books, and this is very much to the frustration of the artists themselves, that the actual overall strategic vision has not been there. How will you judge just how well that strategic vision has worked?
We're working through it. In fact, we've got a meeting tomorrow with Audit and Risk Committee, who are doing exactly that exercise with us to work out what are, this is more business speak, key performance measures are going to be going forwards. And we need to get those right. And it seems to me that one of the things that we most need to generate, of course we need to generate outcomes in terms of numbers of things that we fund and numbers of people that we fund, numbers of people that we reach, and all of the things that are countable. But it seems to me that one of the biggest things we can do is to create a deeper sense of confidence and ambition and aspiration and hope from people working in the arts, screen and creative industries in Scotland, and a belief system that's based on a really clear, navigable route map that we make available to people so that they can engineer their own futures and find ways to be able to open doors, make new partnerships, make new connections in and out of Scotland in order to be able to afford opportunity and realise dreams. And we need to find a way of being able to generate a real sense that that is possible here, and that people can build extraordinary things that are going to be valued both for their intrinsic worth, but also generate opportunities and work and jobs and income basis for people, which are absolutely fundamental if people are going to be able to sustain themselves and live their lives as cultural ambassadors.
Could I just finish on the point? Do you think that'll come about because people feel that there's more consultation with them, that they're more involved in setting that strategy than was obviously a lot of the criticism before, that they felt that they were being left out and the decisions were taken by people who weren't actually involved in the arts, rightly or wrongly?
I think already I've developed a reputation as a listener, and in my application process for this role, I came out very strongly as a learner in my skills profile. This organisation only has a sense of purpose if it listens and learns from the people that it has responsibility to serve and work with, and we're doing that in a very, very focused way. And so far, the feedback has been, we believe you when you say you want to take on our views. At every stage of this journey of producing this plan, we've taken on board comments, and we're introducing new words into the content of the plan as people offer them up. I'm comfortable with that, and I'm comfortable that we won't fix anything until we've had the chance to go out to the widest possible group of people who want to feed in. And I hope very much that when we publish our plan, it's not going to be a surprise, because so many people will have contributed to it that it will become everybody's.
John McCarthy.
Yes, you may be aware that the committee invited questions to witnesses through Twitter, and we had quite a decent response. And I wanted to pass one particular question on to you that came to us through that route. And the issue raised was, again, something your predecessor and the board had decided to do, was to expand the office premises in Waverley Gate in Edinburgh in order to sublet to other organisations, and partly as an event space. And according to this person, you were paying £270,000 annually for this expanded HQ. She would like me to ask you if you think that's an appropriate use of funds, and also whether you think that there's validity in the criticism that some of your Edinburgh-based clients who used to sublet your premises for events are now actually losing out because you're hosting them yourself.
Could you answer that in 140 characters or less?
I agree, it's a lot of money. It's fixed into our lease. We're trying to rent the space out at reasonable rates for people to use it, and we're not running events, as far as I know, ourselves in those spaces.
Right. So are you suggesting you think it's too much money? Or would you like to revisit it? If it was up to you, would you like to revisit the lease?
We're trying to recoup the money through leasing the space out to other users across the arts, screen and creative industries. And we are currently undertaking a piece of work looking at our estates across Edinburgh and Glasgow. It's our duty as a public body to ensure that we operate as efficiently and as effectively as we can.
How much money are you recouping in Edinburgh?
I'd have to go back and look at the budget and get that figure back to you.
Right.
But it was one of the first things that I asked my senior leadership team to look at when I joined the
I
organisation.
take it when this decision was made by your predecessors that there was some kind of plan in place that you would recoup so much of the 270k a year by subletting. Presumably, was that plan in place, or was there not?
I haven't seen a clear plan, but there may well have been a plan which
in someone's head?
I haven't found yet. But it is an
Right.
issue that we're aware of, and we're looking at how we can make best sense of the utilisation of that space. We do get a lot of people using the space, including the Scottish Government, on a regular basis, and the other agencies, development agencies. So it is a used space. It's become a hub for people to connect up, and that's quite useful in terms of all the things that we talked about in terms of encouraging more dialogue across the work that we do.
What about the point that you would be then putting yourself in a position of competition with other arts organisations in Edinburgh that might have been letting out their space for similar events? Do you think that's a valid criticism?
I think it probably is.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I thank, on behalf of the committee, you for coming along this morning and giving us your views. Clearly, that, as I said at the beginning, it's been a troubled time over the last 12 to 18 months, but I think we all hope, both on this committee and I'm sure in the wider artistic community, that we're over most of those troubles and we're now travelling in the right direction. And hopefully, that when we see the reviews that are published next year and the work that you're doing, that we can see some of the work and some of the progress that's been made to improving some of the communication between the organisation and the wider artistic community. I'm sure that's something we'd all like to see. But, can I thank you very much for coming along this morning. That concludes this morning's meeting. Our next meeting will be on the 3rd of December, when we'll take evidence on school closures as part of our scrutiny of the Children and Young People Bill. And can I now close the meeting?